So is that just all on recording?
Correct.
That's funny. Well, we're having a conversation anyway.
All right.
Well, on the live, on the social media, they might have heard it.
Right.
Off the
It
phone.
was
Hey
on-
guys,
No,
someone
no.
caught it.
What's up?
Looks
are
like
the
a
only
great
ones
convo.
here.
Absolutely. We really appreciate you being here. All right. Well, in that
Oh
case,
my
let's
God.
kick this off again.
That's right. Andrew, take two.
Run it back. Here
Run it
we
back,
go.
DJ.
Hello, and welcome to season 6, episode 37 of Dualistic Unity. I am enjoying this conversation about paying attention and being involved in allowing things to play out and not hold yourself back, from admitting when you're not paying attention. No, because if that's there and it's like, okay, there isn't so much of a fight to maintain, because it's like, oh, I should be paying attention, because that then overlays, the attention that you are paying. And part of me so badly wants to say the same thing I said after the intro, but it'll probably come up at some point if we get there.
Whoever knows what it is, because we're paying attention to here and now. And what I love, hello, listener, you don't know this, but prior to us recording this intro, we actually already recorded an intro and about 12 minutes of an episode without realizing that the microphone was not working. And what I find fascinating about that is I checked the microphone settings before we started, but I missed that there were two microphones under Yeti because we were trying to install our new system for podcasting yesterday. And so in this episode about paying attention, I didn't pay attention.
We missed something.
I missed something. And there's the opportunity again. Well, because while you're saying the introduction here, I could have been judging myself for missing that thing and then missing everything that you said and thus missing the lesson that I'm going through right now. Because that's really where we were going with this, is the fact that each and every moment is an opportunity to learn more about yourself, but not the conceptual self, and not as an action where you are rigorously taking notes about yourself. There's no actual thought about yourself that's necessary whatsoever, because you are a continuously growing intelligence. That intelligence does not require you to be in there doubting it. It is already keeping in mind everything it's ever experienced, which brought us to the topic of attention and depth.
Yes, absolutely. And when we're saying that you are a growing intelligence, it's not the you that you want it to be. It's certainly not that you are this intellectual wizard who is learning the mastery of attention. It's that reality, this moment is a growing intelligence that is always bringing up what is relevant. And that's usually, and I dare say always, the only thing that's available in this moment are the things that are relevant to this moment. So you don't ever have to look for missing pieces or something else that will be that final thing, that additional next step. There's nothing to do, because everything that is relevant to the moment that you're in is already there. So when you're just paying attention to what's there, you're developing that sensitivity and you're making use of everything that's already relevant and available to you in this moment. So there's nothing else to look for and there's nothing else to do. But in paying attention, which is always an option, not a requirement, but it's always a choice you can take, that in and of itself is just ripe with potential and opportunity. And there, everything else kind of figures itself out. And then things just happen to make sense instead of making you, the idea, feel better.
And that's that point of panic that we talked about early in the episode that was not recorded.
That was a warm-up.
Was that when you allow yourself to simply be the intelligence that you are, to continue on, understanding that you're always taking in information, you are always considering all of that information, whether you think you are or not.
Right.
That means that you're not going through the list of thoughts and doubts and fears about what could happen, what might happen, what did happen, and what it means about you all the time. So now all of a sudden there's this space. There is this space where you find yourself actually just sitting in a chair, rather than sitting in a chair on a trajectory to somewhere, rather than sitting in a chair
to there
that somehow hates you, rather than any of that, you're just sitting in a chair and there's a lovely space there.
Yeah.
But with that space, there is the lack of carrot and stick that we have so often used as a motivator and a driver to tackle things, to make decisions, to even try and convince ourselves that we could get through the next obstacle or challenge, we've always relied on that background thought. And that background thought always revolves around the idea of us. Because there is no carrot and stick except to the idea of you. Right? Because if you really break it down to what you need as an organism outside of your idea of you, food, water, shelter, maybe,
clean air,
but these are actual needs, right? There's no carrot and stick involved there, except, well, if I don't do that, I might die or be cold, right? So those are actual physical, real things. But the rest of what we operate against is like fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of being alone, fear of judgment, all of which revolve around the idea of us. So when you no longer believe that idea of you is you, then all of those carrots, all of those sticks start disappearing. And you end up in a big field with no carrots and sticks and nothing but options. And you really have to choose for you. And that can seem jarring because you're like, but if I make a choice and I go somewhere and I'm not thinking about it, anything can happen. Right. But everything you've ever been up until that point is going to be with you. It's just that you don't know that, which is why you keep going into thought, trying to think about how much you know and limiting it in the process.
Oh, straight up. I felt like even just the last couple of days, like in interactions, in even just like getting back to people's text messages, like trying to go back to like, how do I normally respond to this? Like, how do I normally interact with this? But that's all based on habitual sort of responses. And it isn't that fresh and new sort of potential thing where it's just being expressed. It's just, responding, just having sensitivity, just taking, what you get out of the moment and having sensitivity and responding accordingly, not putting yourself first. Because I think that's maybe where it's been feeling different, is like, what do I normally say as opposed to just responding in the moment? There isn't that like thing that you go through. It's just like, oh, I'm here responding. There is infinite potential. I could respond in any way, shape, or form. And it's just on me to respond. And it's not about anyone else or getting direction from anyone else or even that sense of like, how you've normally done things. But it can feel like, that, like just not putting yourself first is selflessness, like, and making that your driver, not in the sense of a reason to feel, not to feel good about yourself, but just because there's space. So it's like, why not? I don't need anything. So why not just like do things? And it almost can feel like you're letting go of some sense of value in a way.
Oh yeah.
You absolutely are. You're letting go of the idea that your value is something that can be measured.
Conceptual value is what's lost, not inherent. Might be one way to describe
Straight
it.
up.
Right?
No, that's the thing. Like if you're really letting this go, you're recognizing that value was never a thing. That it is another illusion like control that we actually thought we could have or lose. It's just another illusion. It's ridiculous when you think about it. What is the value of a person? Like, well, when?
Right. What's the value of life? That little thing.
Like expressed throughout their whole life, just like immeasurable. Because I mean, how many ripples would come from that then other people can use, that other people can use, that other people can use? I mean, how do you even define value at that point if it's all potential, right? Even a life squandering your quote unquote value could inspire others.
Yeah, and it does.
So where's the value? Like, there's no way to measure that because it's all potential. You can't measure potential. And that's the point. We keep trying to make ourselves a definite, absolute point of value, when in fact we are potential. The only thing we can do is express it more or less. But that's what we are, is potential. So how do you think about potential?
You can't, because it's potential. It's unknown. Anything that's in potential is unknown. So trying to think about it is just getting in your own way. It's like looking backwards, trying to have an idea of potential. It's like, oh, where have I reached potential? And come up with examples of potential. And it's like, no, the potential and the unknown and the freedom and the uncertainty and all of that, they all tie together. Like you don't get one without the other. You don't get control and a sense of freedom. You don't get that sense of like thinking about yourself. And I think I've just realized recently how often it's like it's there, and it's like in consideration, in potential of like, personal wants and desires and whatnot, as opposed to looking past that. And if you're not doing that as much, or you see the futility in it and then you try to, it's like there's no point in doing that so much. It's like you can just be less selfish, like be focused on more of what's going on and the experience that you're having, and just like giving your all with no direction necessarily, but taking in all the considerations and being like, okay, doing this makes sense now, working on this makes sense now, doing this project makes sense now. And like there are things that are there, but there's no guarantee even the thing you choose is like, the best thing, but it's the thing that you're choosing, and you're going to learn from that, and you're going to learn from that, and you're going to learn from that. And yeah, that's life. There's no guarantees, and like there's no one to give you a guarantee. But that's, I think, a lot of where that desire for validation comes from, is like someone else giving you a guarantee instead of just choosing for yourself. Instead of just making that choice that doesn't come with any validation whatsoever. There's no sense of certainty. There's no guarantees. It's just choosing moment to moment your life and being cool with that for you, and like being willing to just have fun yourself, make the most of it yourself. So,
but the practice of that is different than just, talking about it. And this is a perfect example. We have a question here, and I love this. Do you guys know who U.G. Krishnamurti is? This is not Jiddu Krishnamurti. This is another person entirely. He completely destroys the need for searching and seeking. What are you trying to get? Some mental projection? And what I love about this is that U.G. Krishnamurti didn't destroy anything. All this person's doing is referring to somebody else who is once again pointing out the correct path, contradicting exactly what they're trying to get across to us. You guys must be searching for somebody, as I refer to another teacher who's really teaching the right way.
It's coming from someone else. Gotta be someone else.
Like there's a big difference between the application, which doesn't require you to get anywhere, and the cerebral masturbation that so many of us think is the application. And it doesn't matter which philosopher you're talking about, or it doesn't matter which teacher you're referring to. They're not necessary. They're not necessary. And if they're not necessary, then you don't need to refer to them if you're trying to make a point. You could have just asked, what are you trying to get? Some mental projection, and actually have it been your point.
It just doesn't make sense to refer to someone who is not living with my considerations. I'm going to refer to someone else who lived with entirely different circumstances and perspectives and lessons and all of that. But they know exactly what works for everyone else, because philosophy is a one size fits all. I hope you know. Once one of us gets it, that's it. That one set of golden concepts is what you can always refer to. In fact, I'm so sorry. The silver bullet concepts. It's not gold.
Well, that's what he means about ending the searching and seeking.
Right, because he has found the pathway, the way. And it's like, there is no way, even if you do admire the way that someone else shows up, that's the way that they're showing up, with their considerations, with their choice to pay attention for them, not to inspire you, because if they are trying to inspire you, it's not for you. They're definitely not doing that for you. They're doing that for them, to confirm that they have found the right way, because with control, what always pairs nicely with control? The fear of losing control. They go together like two wolves that hunt in a pack together. They never hunt alone. So if you see one, expect to see the other. And what's great about the space that doesn't look for control is that there isn't space made for that losing of control. And so it's almost simultaneous. And if you're feeling in conflict, if you're feeling that fear of losing control, take a look at what you're trying to control and why. And just noticing the why, because usually the answer boils down to, in one way, if there was a thesis, I'm afraid and I don't know what to do with that fear. And so I will control what I think is the source of that fear. Usually not seeing that the source of that fear is me, because I was afraid. I gave myself the reason to be afraid. Because if you put usually two people in the same situation, they're not going to be afraid of the same things in that situation. So that means fear is very customizable. And if it's customizable, let's take a look at who's customizing it. And that's usually you.
We have another question. And I think this is appropriate given the conversation. So I'm going to pass it over to Andrew for this one. Do you think there's a difference between selfishness or being self-interested? I find myself putting others first and sometimes lose myself in the process. But is that also selfish?
I think it depends on whether you're. I think it's a hard line to draw immediately when you're doing things for or to help someone else. I guess it kind of is if you're still deriving or trying to derive some sense of value from, putting others first, as if that's like the right thing to do instead of being sensitive to the moment that you're having. So like the selfishness, selflessness direction, there can be direction there for sure. But I think there does come a point where it can become enabling also. Like I think that's something to just watch out for when it comes to helping others, is how much you're enabling them to continue to feel like they need something outside of themselves. Because if you're deriving some sense of value from feeling like you're giving that to someone, then that's not really fair to them. Like that's hindering their own ability to grow. And so there is a balance, and I think it's another one of those moment to moment things. But that sense of losing yourself in the process of being selfless, it's like, what exactly are you losing there? Your sense of what you want to do for yourself. And then I think it comes down to looking at like how much you need and like what those wants are, because you don't have to want anything outside, like in the moment that you're experiencing, like even in your life, assuming that there's something beyond the experience that you're having that's going to make you more or make you better, so.
It's a good answer. You said something there, and it made me think of something that's equally important, because you said you want to make sure you're not deriving value from making them feel better, from encouraging, their selfishness, right? You equally want to make sure you don't derive value from the opposite, that you don't derive value from teaching them a lesson, from being a source of insight for them. Like you definitely don't want to derive. There's no value to be derived, I guess, is the point. That's really it. And if there's no value to be derived, then it really just comes down to what makes sense. And that will always come down to the quality of your attention on every moment, because that dictates the layers that you see behind that moment. But the more you can just let go of the idea of any right thing, whether it's encouraging them to just express who they are right now, as divisive as it might be or not, or encouraging them to question that divisiveness. Either way, depending on the situation, depending on how they're feeling, how you're feeling, the time of day, the environment, the noise level in the back, the kind of fucking music that's playing, what kind of breakfast they had, all of that changes what the conversation is. There is no right path. There is no right path. Sometimes the best thing you can do for somebody when they are beating themselves up is just to go, I'm sorry, you're having a bad day. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just go, you're doing this to yourself. There's no way to tell. There's no way to tell. There is no right answer. The only answer that is ever going to be the right one is the one that you make. It's just the choices that you make. That is the right one. How right is not a measure. You can't question that. But how deep? That's the question I like to ask. How much depth does my choice have in this moment, as opposed to how right is it? And that depth is dependent on how much attention I'm paying to this moment. So this goes back to this question. Do you think there's a difference between selfishness or being self-interested? I find myself putting others first and sometimes lose myself in the process. And I would say bullshit. I would call that as bullshit, because nobody ever puts others first. You're never putting others first. All you're doing is not putting yourself first. That's really it. You're just not, because it's for you. Like, oh, I put others first. Why? Well, for them. Bullshit. You put others first because you don't like feeling like a selfish bastard. So that's still for you.
Yeah.
That's still for you at the end of the day, right? But if you forget that, that's when you start to lose yourself. If you forget that you are deliberately not putting yourself first for your own choice, then eventually it starts becoming just people pleasing.
Which is really just another way for me to say me pleasing.
Exactly.
I'm just
It's
pleasing
just
myself.
another, exactly.
And I'm using people as a means to that end.
And then it comes back to this question, like, well, is that also selfish? So, like, am I doing the right thing? It's like, you are still thinking about yourself.
Your question kind of answers itself.
Absolutely. So is there a difference between selflessness and being self-interested, or selfishness and being self-interested? Self-interested is really, you're still looking at the idea of yourself, unless you're looking at the reality of yourself. The reality of yourself is you here now. It's not something that has a value. It's not something that can be measured. It's not something that can be right or wrong. It's not better or worse. There's none of that. You're just here right now. Okay. That type of self-interest in this moment is called enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Right? It's enthusiasm in what you're doing at this present moment. Everything else is self-involvement in terms of it being the concept, the idea. But this is why these words suck. This is why the messenger is always a traitor, is because as soon as you mention self, depending on who you're talking to, they're going to go, oh, the idea of me, or, oh, yeah, me. And that's the problem. The very same word is interpreted in infinite different ways across the spectrum according to that person's commitment, that person's level of investment in that idea of themselves. And so the conversation doesn't go anywhere. The conversation doesn't communicate anything. Your presence does, though. The level of attention that you are here and now does, because then again, it comes down to your inflection, your tone, the way that you're standing, the way that you're making eye contact, or the way that you're not. All of that stuff goes into each and every moment of interaction, goes into each and every moment of relationship, and that has more sway than words ever will. Right? Because you're actually putting the attention into here and now, where there's potential.
Yeah. And we have concepts that point to that when we say that, at least 70% of all communication is nonverbal. When you can feel the tension in the room, when you can feel someone's anxiety, when someone is not saying a single word and yet you feel the experience that they're having. We have concepts that point to this, and yet we just dismiss it like, oh, I can feel the tension, but that doesn't really mean what it's implying it means. We're not really connected. We're not really in sync with each other. I'm still my individual self. And then you settle there. You settle on that point because it seems to be convenient, but the price feels like it's going up and up. And I'm just, not seeing how worthwhile it is to pay for that price to take things individually, which I love that was, that phrasing came up yesterday, because usually we'll say you're taking things personally. But I love that it was brought up, you're taking things individually. You, in particular, the individual concept of you is how you're filtering all of this moment and all of the potential and all of your attention through the individual perspective of how it's affecting you, the concept. And it's just, it's felt more than said. And even when people are saying the right words, you can feel where that's coming from. Whether that's just a really good show with a curated script that sold really well, or whether someone is feeling what they're saying more than saying what they're feeling.
Well said. We have another question here. Can we ever really care for someone else, or are we only caring based on how we care for ourselves? Pushing that question further. As I find this question fascinating, because I would say that if you are asking about a specific person, then yeah, that's really based on how you can care for yourself. Like, because you wouldn't have that preference if it wasn't also about how you care for yourself. And what I mean here is that, like, a lot of times you'll have parents, for example, who instead of thinking what's best for the kid, they think what's best for them as a kid, right? What would they have wanted? And so their relationship with their kid really becomes a relationship with their childhood.
And what they didn't get and how they're going to give that usually to the next kid.
Absolutely. And so that is based on a specific person, right? Like there's a relationship with an individual. Same can be true for friends, where you're looking for friends that validate you, or, you know, or relationships where you're looking for relationships that kind of soothe all your insecurities, make you feel less unstable, you know, make you feel more wanted, you know, that kind of thing. So those relationships are almost always based on how you care for yourself. Because if it wasn't about how you care for yourself, then it wouldn't be about an individual person. It would be about everyone. See, that's kind of the question. You know, can you really care for someone else? Only if you're truly caring for everyone, right? Because we are all that. We are all those human beings. We are all those children that you were. We are all the same blank slate. We are all the same innocent fucking creatures. Like, if you're not acknowledging that across the fucking board, then it is still about you. It's still about you, because we're all of this. All of us are going through the exact same fucking human experience. And until we relate on that level, then we're just trying to self-soothe. We're really just looking for something that makes me feel better, makes me feel valuable, makes me feel less alone. That's really it. And you can't care about everyone until you let go of that.
And if you don't let go of that, then it's just all coping mechanisms. Like, it's coping mechanisms for this ability, like an excuse to think about yourself, almost. Like, oh, I think about myself a lot. I have these assumptions about myself. So I'm going to live my life based on these assumptions and then build a life around those assumptions and ways to respond to those assumptions. Like, oh, I'm not pretty enough. Got to do certain things to be prettier. Focus on that. I'm not, you know, I'm not light enough, so I got to lose weight to do this. And it's like, that's then becomes our days. I don't have, you know, a big enough house. I need a bigger house. So I'm going to keep working to get that thing. And it's like these assumptions about our value that's so individual, that perspective of our value. And yet that assumption that you have, like, isn't where you're at. And so to have to do something beyond, it's like, it can feel like it gives you structure to do something beyond being where you're at and being informed by the experience that you're having and paying attention and being enthusiastic about the experience. But if you think there's something that, you know, you got to do to become more or to maintain out of fear of becoming less, like that's going to then be where the focus goes. And then that's going to dictate your experience, and everything's going to be surrounding that, which all has to do with you. And you don't see people, you know, you don't hear people as easily, as opposed to, you know, letting go of that sense of that wall of control, really, like that space between you and them that is you, your sense of certainty, your sense of control, and just being willing to look past that for a second, you know, for a moment, for the moment that you're in, like that, then other options open up, like other things open up, and then you see a little bit more of the potential opportunities and like what makes sense in the moment. But as long as you're staring at yourself or focused on yourself, like it's all going to be things about you and things to maintain you and try and it's just what's right there. It's like staring through a window, but staring at the window instead of staring past the window.
Fuck yeah, I love that. And it's like, you don't have to learn how to see better. It's like, as soon as something is out of the way, you inherently inevitably you just see when there's nothing in the way. So you don't have to learn how to see better. You don't have to reason why you haven't seen. It's just, I'm trying to see, and why is it so hard to see? Damn, okay, let's take a look around. Something might be in the way, I wager. Maybe. Also, you know, and just being able even to consider that there might be something in the way, and that's why it's so hard to see, versus I'm not seeing well enough because I'm not good enough to see.
I really enjoyed the imagery that you just created. You're looking at the window instead of looking through the window. And that's very much what we're doing with our thoughts about ourselves, because we can look through our thoughts to reality, where all of our thoughts are informing the depth of all of the things that could be perceived about the moment that we're in. But we don't look through them and allow them to inform us on the fly. We stare right at one that scares us, right? And that's pretty much it.
We're staring at the scary basement window, guys.
And so that's it. We're just like, oh, I don't like that. And we stare right at it instead of through it to what it's informing, right? But it's scary because we're still holding on to the idea of myself or ourselves. Like the idea that somebody doesn't like me is only scary if I need them to.
Mhm.
Right? Like that really helps to remember. And if I don't need them to, then the idea that somebody doesn't like me is something I can learn from.
Mhm.
I can look at that and go, am I doing something there? Or is that person just judging for no reason?
Mhm.
And just honestly look at it. But if I'm afraid to do that because it tears me down, I'll never do that.
Mhm.
I'll never do that. I'll never use these thoughts, these perceptions, these possible things.
Yeah.
That's all they are, possible perceptions, possible ways to look at what's happening from different perspectives, different points of view, different states of mind. That's all your brain is ever seeing, is just possibilities in terms of what is this moment,
Mhm.
right? What is this moment? Because the brain's trying to pin it down. So it can only look at all of the facets like it would on a diamond. It's just looking at all of them. But no individual facet is the diamond. Right. And that's the point. The whole thing, all the facets inform the beauty of the diamond. All of the perspectives of this moment inform the beauty of this moment.
Mhm.
All of them. But we cherry pick according to the ones we like and the ones we don't. And the only reason we like or don't like them is because of the idea of ourselves that we are trying to protect, because it gives us a sense of value. But it's only value that can only ever be taken away or built up. It's not actual value, because if it was, it would stick.
Mhm.
You could do one thing and that would be it. You'd be valuable forever.
Flip one, a magical switch.
Absolutely.
According to everyone, too. Assume that, it must be the case. If I have this perception of myself, it must be the case for everyone else. And it's like, no, it's a bunch of different perceptions out there. And so the one that you're staring at is just blinding. It can be comforting, but it's comforting like the blanket that you put over your face without, being willing to see beyond that or take the blanket off. It's like, yeah, there's all of these things happening when you take that blanket off. And then you can actually be informed by all of those things. But if you're afraid of letting go or not feeling like, you have some guarantees or some certainty, it's going to feel more comfortable to try and keep staring at your sense of certainty, your sense of what things mean about you versus not, versus just being willing to, be informed by things. And like, if that sense of, taking the blanket off is frightening, it's like the things that you see will be frightening. Like, it's your response so often to that experience of just like uncertainty, because then it's like, whoa, anything. And that's usually when, certain fears can pop up. But then it's like, if you're not afraid, then there's just a ton of crazy, cool potentials, and opportunities to do things that you can choose without any idea of, where it's going to go or what it's going to mean. But, you can choose them. And a lot of them are informed based on, just the response that you're having or the assumptions that you're making or the, stories you're telling yourself.
What priority are you making? And that usually is reflected impeccably in the moments that you're in. So it's like, I'm not really loving the ripple that I'm riding. It's like, okay, well, what's the priority of this moment? Is it me, the individual, that I'm prioritizing? Is that, am I staring at the window pane? Is that the priority, or is everything else this priority? And usually what we do choose is the structure, because the structure implies a guaranteed result. And then we choose that structure over and over, and we're just hoping for that result. And yet it never comes, and we keep investing in the structure instead of trying sensitivity and faith and trusting ourselves to not need the structure, right? So the example that comes to mind is driving to work. I would drive to work on the same path every single day, and I would assume that was my structure. That was the structure of my Monday through Friday, and it must always be the same. And then I got pulled over, relied on the structure, did not get the expected result, right? And it was because I was paying so much to the structure and having no sensitivity to what was happening, because I had a guaranteed result, because I had a structure that I was relying on. And that was the choice. And then I got the ticket and I was like, okay, well, what were we prioritizing? The image of me at work. I didn't want to disrupt the image of a good employee. And so I was rushing to get to work because I wanted to maintain that image. My priority in that moment wasn't reality, wasn't that moment. It was maintaining this image that I thought I had curated at work. There we go. Just by noticing that, we have yet to get another speeding ticket for driving to work.
Pretty much it.
You know, and that was just one example of how I used a structure to forego sensitivity, and how that ripple I had to ride. I didn't like it. And then I got to see where that ripple came from, what I was prioritizing. It wasn't actually my experience. It was just the image. And the price to maintain that image was too damn high. So I stopped wanting to pay it.
Oh yeah, I went through the same similar thing, structures with food and nutrition stuff for sure, like big time, like having some calorie goal at the end of the day, and like whether I was hungry at the end of the day, whether I was full at the end of the day, like I was hitting that number. It had nothing to do with how I was feeling. It had nothing to do with my sensitivity to the moment. It was just, that's what I'm doing because my priority was how I looked. Was I trying to build muscle, cut, blah, 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 all those things. That was the priority. Yeah, exactly. As opposed to being just sensitive to my body. And I would, weigh myself every single day, make sure that it was like, had a response, not take it too seriously, but still like every day.
Well, you weren't paying attention to it. I felt like you told me about like a nerve in like your arm that you weren't paying
attention.
Oh yeah,
you were just I had like a tendon hurting down my chest into my arm that was like just always bothering me, and it was like just blew right through that.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Well, get another one of those.
Good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and then that's the priority. And like my stomach would feel like garbage at night a lot of times, and then when I stopped doing all that, it's like, oh wow, there's actually, sensitivity to all these things.
Your arm was like, thank you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That was a big part too. It's like, oh, there's actually, muscles here that are tight as shit. And it was even weird to like be able to straighten my arm. Like I didn't like that feeling. Yeah. I liked when it was like,
just
but another sense of that was the food stuff. Another sense of trying to control things, having a guarantee like, oh, if I get to this point, then more people are going to like me. No, I was going to like myself.
I just feel less insecure about how I'm living.
Yeah.
That's right. I'll be more valuable. I'll be better.
That's it. That's really the big addiction that we have to kick when it comes to just being ourselves, is the idea that we have to do something to be something. That we have to do more to be more. Like that's an actual possibility instead of just an inevitability. Isn't that funny? Like you are going to keep doing. Welcome to life. And as you do, you're going to pay attention to a greater or lesser degree, and that is going to change you to a greater or lesser degree. You can't stop that.
No.
You can just limit it. You can really just put the brakes on it if you want to, but you cannot stop it. You can just fight it tooth and nail. Now, this is a good question. I wanted to address this. What would you say thought is? The response, the labeling, the individualizing of memory and mental imagery, and then comparing these labels with one another, limiting infinity with finiteness. And, I've thought about this a lot, which is kind of a funny response in itself. But how did we think before we knew language? How did we think before we learned concepts? Because it's not that we didn't. Babies are born. They do learn how to move themselves around. They do figure out how to communicate for food before they ever learn the word for food. Like they are making noises, they are using their intelligence, and then we teach them concepts over top. And then their intelligence uses those concepts. But before the concepts were taught to them, how did we think?
Pattern recognition is my first thought. And because babies recognize their mother's voices through the womb, so they're memorizing sounds,
right?
And then they're memorizing faces. When they see a new face, they like get scrunched up, so they're like photo, I forget what it is, but they're memorizing the face, they're memorizing the sounds, and they're looking for patterns before they have concepts.
Now I like this because then as we start to recognize patterns, we start to learn concepts. That's my friend Jamie, that's my mom, things like that. So now we've learned concepts over top of this, and our intelligence is still working, but now it's working with the concepts. But before the concepts, it was still working. The intelligence was still comparing. It was still processing patterns.
Yeah.
It just didn't have the label for those patterns. And then as we get older, we start to actually confuse the label for the reality, right? So if you know that that's not the case, then this is what we've been saying this entire time. That space where you're not thinking about yourself, that is thought. That is thought. thought. It's real form before you start superimposing a language onto it. But why do we use concepts? Why do we use words? To communicate with others, right? So don't you find it funny that we talk to ourselves? We talk to an idea of ourselves, which is why we use words in our head when we're thinking to
That
ourselves.
internal dialogue is between you and you.
And some fictional you. That's right.
Your
That's
imaginary
the whole
friend.
point. So, and if it wasn't for that, would you be using language? This is why when people are like, well, sure, maybe prayer is talking to myself, but what's wrong with that? It's like, why do you need to talk to yourself?
Yeah, it sounds like a big old distraction.
And I'm not saying don't talk to yourself, but at the end of the day, why? Outside of working through something that ultimately you probably don't need to work through.
Right. Well, I've got to tell myself what I want. I don't know.
Right? Well, that's exactly it.
This is my wish list. Here's Amanda's wish list. Amanda, you now that you know, you take care of that.
But the question is that what would you do with your day if you weren't narrating your value throughout it? If you weren't going through the day thinking about yourself in terms of what everything you do means about you and how you're perceived and your value and all that, how much more insight and how much more awareness of each and every moment would you have?
How much more momentum? You'd be bouncing from choice to choice. You wouldn't be dragging.
But that's the
between
point, because
choices.
none of it means anything about you.
Yes, you just do.
So
Well,
therefore,
makes
it's
sense.
always just about where you are. It's always just about the puzzle that presents itself. The knot that you are now a part of unraveling. And that's all it is, because that's what your intelligence does. It allows itself to lend some organizing force, but not if you're in there telling it what to organize. Then it doesn't know how to organize what it's supposed to be doing, which is itself, life. You're saying, no, that's not you. You're this little thing over here. Pay attention to that. But it's like, but all this shit in the background, you're like, has nothing to do with it. Pay attention to that. And that's very much it. It's like, why do I have all this anxiety? Why am I so afraid? Why do I feel like I don't have value? Why? It's because you're focused on this little idea of you. And those are all the repercussions. Those are all the insights that are like kind of just clamoring at the door, begging for you to look at them and go, can you stop making us? Can you please stop fucking creating us out of your need to avoid shit? But that's it. And that's all they're trying to tell us. That's all of these thoughts and these consequences and this ongoing need to get somewhere. It's just telling us that we're still obsessed with this idea of being more. And that's okay, because you don't want to get rid of that idea of being more if it means it's going to make you more, right? You have to accept these things. You just notice them. Notice that you are insecure. Notice that you want to feel like you're in control. Notice that you're a little competitive. Notice that maybe you interrupt people. Notice that you don't express yourself as often. But that's it. Just notice it. Just notice it. Stop making a story out of it. It's like Jill noticed that she doesn't talk enough. Chapter 4. Now Jill has to do this to talk more. It's like, or
now
Jill
she talks
could,
100 words per minute.
Right?
Yeah,
It's
got to
her
read
new
these
rule.
7 books and go through these courses and learn all these things.
Instead of just noticing it, and in noticing it, you can reassess your life. Isn't that funny? It's like, wow, I'm not really talking a lot today. Do I care? And like, do I? Yeah, maybe I'd want to talk a little bit more, because I did have some stuff in my mind I didn't feel like I could express. That's all you need. Next time, you're going to talk a little more, because you have reassessed and decided that's valuable. But it's that your priority changes over time. Your priorities change over time, and that changes your decisions. It changes the thoughts that you invest in, right? But that's how that happens, is by going through things and then reassessing.
Yeah.
Right? Based on what you're going through. It's like, I think control is going to work for me. Ow, 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 ow.
This time it
maybe
will.
I'll reassess this time, like just.
This time we'll make it work. This time the control will pay out. And it's just what are you're always paying attention to something. So it's like, what is it? Is it going to be your guarantees, or just what's happening and not being in conflict with what's happening? So you're walking down the street, you see someone juggling a bunch of stuff, you're on your way to doing something, they drop something. In that moment, you can decide, pick it up like nothing happened and move about your day, not pick it up and keep going like nothing and move about your day. But picking it up doesn't mean that you're a better, more considerate person, in the same way that not picking it up doesn't mean that you're an asshole.
Yeah.
So it's just like, choose something and the moment continues.
Oh, yeah.
So
What
just
I
make
love about that,
choices.
specifically, I love the fact that, let's say that you're in that situation and you've got two different people. One makes one choice, one makes the other choice.
Mhm.
More likely, the person who's going to stop to pick that up is somebody who has dropped something themselves.
Right.
Right? And nobody was there to help them,
Remember,
or somebody was there to help them.
Yeah.
They went through that experience and like, that sucked. Now they walk by, they see that happen, empathy.
Yes.
Because they can remember themselves being in that situation because you are bringing everything you've ever went through into every moment.
Yeah.
Your brain is always recontextualizing, and that is changing your priority.
Mhm.
You know, it's not something you need to do. Just keep going and paying attention.
Mhm.
You know, before you know it, what you're really paying attention to is empathy. What you're really paying attention to, because that's what you're learning to do with yourself.
Right.
Is to empathize with yourself, to accept
You
yourself.
have to be so hard on yourself, and when you're not
Absolutely.
so hard on yourself, it makes less sense to be hard on other people. Not that you won't do it again, not that you can justify or intellectualize why you did it and where you were and how you're so different now. It just makes less sense to judge people when you're judging yourself less. You see less value in the judging in and of itself, and that has nothing to do with anyone else.
They can go together a lot of times, like all of it, you know. And so you don't have to do so many things to try and double down on like having that sense of a guarantee, you know, that sense of control, that sense of certainty. And this is the point right now where I got to admit that I kind of spaced a little bit there for a sec and missed a couple things, and I'm admitting that.
If it helps,
And
I did it
have
about
them.
25 minutes ago.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah. Because that ability, like just the ability to continuously pay attention without like the background, sort of like getting ready, getting prepared, like having something ready. It's like you can just trust yourself and hear and just pay attention, like just listen without overlaying some sense of like thing on top of it. You don't have to do that at all. And like you can listen and then talk. And that spot where it's like you're used to thoughts fluttering around as things are going on, as opposed to like not so much, like it being just what you're hearing. It's not like this two things happening, like the thoughts that then you can pull from. It's just having the space and then just expressing. But there can be that sense of like, oh, well, these are, you know, my thoughts, and like my thoughts aren't like I'm just expressing, but that's authenticity. Like that's expression. That's where sensitivity is. And it can almost feel like, you know, there isn't as much ability to be sensitive or empathetic even, but that's if, you know, you feel that space and then you run towards thinking about yourself or try to think about yourself, you know, an attempt to think about yourself. Like even this morning, I was like, how do I think about myself again? You know, like how do I come up with, and it's like, it's not necessary. It's always been fluctuating, but it's just that sense of it informs your, you know, personal sense of like, well, I want to do this now, instead of being informed by things, instead of being sensitive, instead of being empathetic. And so you can't do both. If you're focused on yourself, if you're staring at the window, it's really, really hard to be empathetic, to be sympathetic, to be sensitive to the experience that you're having if you keep staring at it. So of course those things aren't going to be there if you're trying to define yourself and measure yourself and focus on yourself. And then if you can look past it, it's like there's a lot of other options there. There are other things to do. So.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to admit, I'm really glad there's the two of you there, because you guys balance out when I check out. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. You paid attention, or you paid attention to something he said. I'm like, that's right. I did pay attention. Technically. But it's like, but that is what's always happening, is that attention is feeling like it's being paid and not. And there's space for everything. And so it's not taking it seriously when you are paying attention. Like, that's right. I'm a quality attention payer. I do it all the time. My success rate is 90% of the time I am paying 100% of attention, you know? And in the same way that it means nothing about you when you're not paying, it's like, oh my God, I'm a piece of shit. I wasn't paying attention. They'll never want to be friends with me again. And we do these extremes, and it reminds me of being like a teenager, and it was like everything was life or death. Oh no. I didn't remember Jessica's birthday. She'll never talk to me again. You know, like, we put so much pressure on ourselves, and it's like, deep breath, take a deep breath. Things are not as drastic as we feel, and And there is going to be examples and experiences that are going to be all over the spectrum. And it's just not judging any point where you just get to dance through the moments. And during our Patreon call yesterday, a beautiful analogy was created about, being the beach. You are the beach in this analogy, and life and potential is a river, and people are flowing down that river. And sometimes we spend our time in the river trying to convince people to come to the beach. But when you are on the beach, is where I wanted to take that analogy. It's almost like relevant information washes up onto your shore like a message in a bottle. And so you don't have to look in the ocean, or you don't have to swim in the river looking for relevant information. Everything that makes sense usually just washes up to your shore. And then you're like, all right, I was thinking about building a hut. All of a sudden there's a memory of building a treehouse in childhood. That's great. And it's just there. And then it just makes sense. And you're like, okay, do we still feel like building the hut? I think we do. We'll give that a whirl. And you just move forward despite not knowing if you're going to make a great one, if anyone's going to visit, are you going to share it? Is it going to be warm enough? It's like all these things have nothing to do with the choice in that moment, because all those questions that you're usually asking are about the theirs. But there has nothing really to do with here. And so it's so tempting, because all those thoughts are like, hey, pay attention to me. I'm panicking over here. And you can. But you can also just treat those thoughts like the drunk friend at the bar. They're there. You're not going to leave the bar, but you don't have to give them so much listening attention. And you could just, and just by saying like, yeah, that's there, you almost effortlessly pay attention to something else. You don't have to decide, I'm never going to listen to that friend again. I'm never going to pick up those bottles. It's just by deciding to pay attention to something else, it automatically takes away attention from what you were spending it on.
Yeah. And I think that's the point I'd like to wrap up this episode on, because I think it's really tempting to think of it as I was paying attention versus I wasn't paying attention, which is an impossibility, because you are, at the end of the day, the experience of attention. It's just that your attention is on something rather than active and general. And what I mean is, it's the difference between standing in a field where you can see the whole field and you have to pay attention to all of it, versus sticking your head in a box. If you stick your head in a box, you are still paying 100% of your attention to what you can see and experience. It's just the box.
Yeah.
Whereas if you take the box away, now your attention can take in a much larger environment. And that's what I'm saying. It's not that you're not paying attention. What are you paying attention to? And if you find yourself paying attention to the fiction of you, are you paying attention to the fact that you're paying attention to the fiction of you? Are you paying attention to the fact that you stuck your head in a box? Because if you notice it, you'll take your head out. And that's when your attention goes back to being wider and more generalized and actively engaged with reality as a whole. But it's just that, just pay attention. It's never that you're not paying attention. It's just sometimes you're paying attention to a fiction that you're still invested in. Pay attention. The consequences are indicating something about that. The frustration, the disappointment, the ongoing need to get somewhere, all of that consequence you're experiencing here and now is the result of your attention on the box. That's it. Just notice your head's in a box. It starts to make sense real quick that you should take the box off. And that's it. That's when your priorities change. It's really not complicated. It's just a result of keep going, keep paying attention, cut yourself a little slack here and there, and remember the difference between the idea of you and the experience of you. But that said, this has been a hell of an episode. I'm going to pass it over to my two partners, friends, co-hosts, and other versions of me to wrap this episode up. But I just wanted to say very quickly to everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Even if you did experience that first 12 minutes of silent episode that did not get released, it was a good one. I promise you, we did get back into a lot of that stuff afterwards. Also, our Port Alberni retreat tickets are now available publicly on the website. If you would like to come to our Port Alberni retreat between November 2nd and 10th, go to dualisticunity.com, click in the events navigation bar, and you will see the retreat in Port Alberni for November. You can find all the information there. We would love for you to join us.
Yeah, looking forward to that. There's going to be lots of things going on that week. We got some whale watching.
Mhm.
We got Dennis on the guitar.
Yes.
We got a chef in process.
We might
All
also
sorts of
see
things.
a few members of Fidelium.
Mhm.
Possibly,
Mhm.
yes.
But yeah, I last thing I'll say in regards to the paying attention is just, I guess things can seem like there's certain ways when you are focused on yourself and are focused on some sense of even, a familiar idea of yourself, and then how that fits into, certain experiences, certain situations. And like, as you go through your life, that idea is going to continue to shift, but it's like this morphing thing that isn't necessarily helpful if you're having more faith in yourself. It's like the lack of faith in yourself creates this need to think about yourself. It's like, that's what I'm going to do instead of just having faith in yourself. But as you trust yourself more and more, it's like it really doesn't make any sense to put the box on. Like, you see the box as blinding, as cutting you off, as dictating your experience somehow. And so, yeah, it's not necessary, and you can just be informed, and keep paying attention and keep choosing things based on sensitivity, based on empathy, based on looking past yourself. And get up in the morning and it's like, all right, here's some things I can do. I'm okay, doing great myself. Let's do some other cool stuff with life. There's no direction, but there is certainly the potential to have influence and enjoy.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to bring it back to something else that's happening right now, which is the People's Podcast Awards, which is happening right now. And one cool thing that I think is cool is that you can help us out. Take us a couple minutes. And if you enjoy this conversation, vote for us in the People's Podcast Awards. And we'll see you around for the next chat. Thank you for joining us, everyone.
That's right. That's podcastawards.com. You can go. It takes 2 or 3 minutes to register. And we are currently in 6 categories, including health, leisure, religion and spirituality, best male hosted podcast, society, and the People's Choice Awards.
Yes.
So if you can vote for us, we'd very much appreciate it. We have a question here. Do you have any plans to travel to Germany soon? We were actually just in the Netherlands in November, but if you would like to know what our upcoming plans will be, we're going to release them on Patreon in August. We highly recommend you join us there because we do group chats 5 days a week. But that's it for today, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.